It was something I should have started throwing a long time before I ever picked it up. I want to say the very first bass I weighed in competition on a Ned rig was in like 2017. And I had the man that came up with it in the back of my boat in like 2011 or 12. So hard-headed a little bit. Yeah, I think so. Hey everybody, welcome back to the garage. We're in here going through a few soft plastic setups, and the last one that we're on right now, I just always have to work those scissors a little bit when I get started. The last one we're going on now is an extremely simple one that I've got a little bit of a backstory with. So it's the Ned rig. I mean, that's what it is. A very, very simple setup, but the quick little backstory on it. One of the very first years I was with Bass Pro Shops, they would have what they call a Riders Conference event. It would be in the fall out there at Big Cedar Lodge on Table Rock Lake in Missouri. And I think it was the first one of those that I ever went to. They would pair you up with different riders. You'd go out and fish for an hour, hour and a half. They'd, come up with an idea, take some pictures, write a story, that kind of stuff. But one of those events, the guy hops in my boat and says, "Hey, I'm Ned Katie." And we go out and we go fishing for a little while, and he was actually fishing as well, and he was catching a bunch of fish behind me. I mean, a bunch of fish. I'm like, "Man, what are you throwing?" And he said, "Well, this is what I call a Midwest finesse rig." Was actually his term that he used for what we all now call a Ned rig, which is a very, very simple setup, taking a small lead head and threading a worm up on it. And he used, just like a 5-inch stick worm. He'd cut it in half. So his bait was about 2 3/4 inches long, somewhere in there, when he would split that in half. But that was basically what it was. Now, one thing that was very interesting with the actual Ned, who used what he named a Midwest finesse rig, he used very, very light weights. Like a 16th ounce would have been a big one for what he was using. He used a lot of like a 32nd, 16th, like I said, was pretty heavy. He'd maybe use up to as heavy as a 3/32nd, but most of what he fished with was really, really light. And it was funny watching him fish it. Bottom contact was not that important to him. He'd let it go to the bottom sometimes, but a lot of times he would swim it back to the boat. It was a very neat learning experience for me. And I'll be honest, that was in like 2011 or 12. It was something I should have started throwing a long time before I ever picked it up. I want to say the very first bass I weighed in competition on a Ned rig was in like 2017. And I had the man that came up with it in the back of my boat in like 2011 or 12. So hard-headed a little bit. Yeah, I think so. But it definitely has been something that really in the last couple of years even I have embraced big time and really, waded in a lot of fish with, especially on the Bass Pro Tour. Lake Chickamauga this year, not exactly the place you would think of going there in June where you would think you'd be throwing, a Ned rig a lot, but it paid dividends for me there. Was able to catch a lot of fish on it. But for me, the setup, so what we've got just, like I said, a very simple jig head. This is a VMC. This is actually a new one from them, that their version of a Ned rig. It's got kind of that mushroom style head, which is what you want. It's got a really good bait keeper. That little triple barb deal of lead right there doesn't tear your bait when you push it up on there, but a lot of times you can catch 3 or 4 fish on, just a standard soft plastic bait on that, not even using, any of those crazy materials and stuff, but very easy to rig. You can rig it up straight, really easy, really quick, and it's gonna hold that bait on there for a long time. For me, some of the baits that I like to use on it, this is actually the Magnum Finneck worm, cut in half. Right there's the other half of it. So you can get 2 out of one of those baits, obviously. You can take a wacky sticko, cut it in half. You can make a couple out of that. Those are a little bit smaller when you do that. Or like the split tail sticko. This one is truly made, comes right out of the pack ready to go on a Ned rig. The 4 or 5-inch sticko, when I'm wanting a bigger bait, sometimes I'll take that 5-inch sticko. This is what I was doing at Chickamauga, and only cut about 1 inch off of it to where it's about a 4-inch bait. Like, well, why wouldn't you just use a 4-inch sticko? Well, because that 5-inch is a bigger diameter, maybe even a little bit bigger than that Magnum Finneck worm. And I wanted that bigger diameter bait. I wanted something big and bulky. Even though I was fishing it, Ned Rig style, I wanted something that was a pretty good size, pretty meaty bait for those fish to see down there. So there's really not a wrong bait to put on the back of that jig head. And Ned himself, he didn't call it a Ned Rig. He called it a Midwest finesse rig, but it really became renamed just because of the popularity of it and how many fish that he showed us all that you could catch with it. So just a little bit of a backstory there on it, and yeah, definitely a fish catching machine. Like I mentioned, Lake Chickamauga, I was up at the St. Lawrence River. It was a big deal for me. In that tournament, a few years ago at Lake Champlain being the first time I ever caught them on it, and Lake St. Clair that particular year was really, I'm going to say really saw the power of it, of just how effective that thing can be. Even though it's so simple, but it can be a really, really effective bait. So anytime you're out there, man, I feel like I've got one of these tied on so much more of the time than what I ever really thought I would. You think of something this small, of just a little bait like that you're targeting little fish. Man, I've weighed in some really big ones. My biggest fish this whole year on Lake Travis down there in Austin, Texas, or my biggest fish of that tournament, came on a Ned Rig. So it will absolutely catch big ones when it's used in the right place. Very simple setup. Fish it on a spinning rod setup. I'll throw that on the 7-1 medium Johnny Morse Platinum spinning rod with a platinum spinning reel, 10-pound hyper braid, and typically a 10-pound leader is going to be my go-to in the XPS fluorocarbon. I'll drop down to 8 if I need to, but generally that 10-pound XPS fluorocarbon leader is the setup for that for my Ned Rig fishing. That's what gets it done for me.